before I get started, I just want to acknowledge and give thanks to Dr. Payne and Dr. Simmons and the rest of the Cornwall Center staff and the rest of your colleagues at Rutgers for inviting me here today. Um, when I looked at the theme that you guys have for these sessions, improving high school outcomes, um, it really occurred to me that talking about principal leadership would be very, very important to hear about in that regard. And so before I get started with that, though, I do want to acknowledge the fact that the work that we're doing here in the district in terms of our principal pipeline is in collaboration with the Wallace Foundation, which is why they are featured on my cover page. And I also want to acknowledge the support that I received personally from our superintendent, Mr. Roger Leone, and the deputy superintendent, Nicole Johnson. So, principal leadership in terms of improving high school outcomes. So, oh, looks like I lost it. No, I got you right. All right. Just want to make sure I got my right screen going here. I lost something.
Yeah, so Matthew, we see a dope. Okay, you're back.
I'm back in. Okay, there we go. Okay, so principals are being viewed differently these days. Prior to 2000, a lot of the research in educational circles viewed principals as a tertiary issue, right? The focus was on teachers and the focus was on students, right? That's what schooling, educational research was largely about. Then around 2000, between 2000 and 2010, principals began to be looked at as a workforce matter, where there was a discussion about principals, but it was more about managing the workforce, right? Principals as managers. And a lot of you may have experienced principals who were former gym teachers or people who had or coaches or football coaches, people who did a lot of controlling, right? And it wasn't so much about educational leadership so much as it was about managing the educational flow. But now principals are looked at as a strategy to improve schools. And that's what the principal pipeline work is all about. So some research at the Wallace Foundation sponsored came up with the concept that principals are multipliers of effective teaching. In other words, good teaching comes about as a result of good leadership. And that research also spurred the development of a new set of professional standards for school leaders. These standards came out in 2015. They're commonly known as the PSEL standards. These are the standards that the state of New Jersey uses for the development of anyone who gets their principal certification in New Jersey has to go through a 2-year residency program, and that residency program is built around these PSEL standards. There are 10 of them. But these standards reflect the new understanding of the role of the principal. And really what it talks about is the fact that there's a strong link between teachers and effective principals. This is starting to talk about what good principals do, right? So in terms of turnover of staff, good principals are able to keep good teachers. There's another link that came out of the research that showed that good teachers are less likely to leave a school if there's a good principal. However, by the same token, right, bad teachers are more likely to leave a school with an effective principal. And one of the main reasons for that is that an effective leader will develop a culture and environment in their building that will make it less comfortable for a poor teacher to want to stay. So we're talking about what good principals do. They help the school get better, and they drive out, to whatever extent, those people who are not as effective. The research also shows that turning around schools doesn't happen without a good leader. Now, that doesn't diminish the importance of a strong home and school connection or support from the community or partnership with outside entities or any other things that make good schools good. What it does say is that a powerful and skilled leader is practically a prerequisite to turning around schools. And as you know, there's lots of need to develop and turn around some of our comprehensive high schools. So in terms of the research that's out there, good principals are a bridge and good leaders in general are a bridge between that research and implementation. So in order for the research to have an impact on what's happening in schools or what's happening in districts, you need that good leader. You need that strong principal to establish the environment whereby those initiatives can take hold and make a difference for students. The research also revealed the fact that investing in principals, investing in leadership is cost effective. You know, it takes a lot of money to recruit principals and put them in place and provide them with professional development. And if you're not going through those processes in the right way, and you're getting people who are not the right fit for the school or not the right fit for the district, then you're wasting resources. And as we all know, resources are becoming more and more scarce these days. So the research from the Wallace Foundation realized and demonstrated that it's a cost-effective means of improving your district and improving schools by investing in principals. So again, I mentioned the research that the pipeline, that the Wallace Foundation presented, and it's in this document, and I sent this to Dr. Simmons. I don't know whether he's had a chance to share it with all of you or not, but you will have access to it. And the Wallace Foundation has made this research available on its website. So if you do not have a copy, you can download a copy there. But implementing a principal pipeline results in outperformance in math and English for middle and high schools. Then there was also noticeably significant effects schools in the lowest quartile of student achievement. So in other words, those schools that were performing the worst had the best impact, the best level of growth when they were in a district where the pipeline was being implemented. And then of course, there's the concept that all schools in the district benefit when there's a pipeline put in place. And most importantly, out of all of this, and this is especially important for us here in Newark, is that the benefits of implementing a pipeline kick in early, even beginning in the second year of implementation. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, in a minute, about where we were in Newark in terms of our implementation of the pipeline. But really this year, and I'm going to get to this in a few minutes, this year is really our first year of being able to implement a pipeline. So how did the Wallace Foundation come to this research about principal pipelines? Well, they examined 6 school districts that were implementing pipelines. And you're going to take a look at these districts and see that a lot of them are very, very similar to what we have here in Newark. And so let's take a look at those 6 districts.
Matthew.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So what is the incremental measurement in terms of having an impact on an outcome? So is it 10% improvement, 5%? What's the variable?
Yep. So I'll back up a little bit, and all of that is spelled out in this document here. There's lots of statistical analysis that is laid out in this document here. I don't have a copy of it on me, but this is where you can get an answer to those questions, Mr. Jones.
Matthew, can I add something? It's Charles.
Yes. Good morning, sir.
My memory is that in the RAND study, which I think you're just about to go into some details on, most of the academic impacts were in something like a 6, 7, 8% range, which is relatively large for an impact done at this scale across many districts. I think one of the things that some of us need to put our heads to thinking about is trying to refine the size of the impact estimates. What's happening now is that most of this is based on cross-sectional point-in-time research, right? I think it's almost got to be the case that the influence of the principle accumulates over time. You already suggested that in some ways. And right now, most of the impact literature does not look at it that way.
Thank you, sir. So again, we're going to go through the list of districts where the research was done for Wallace. And so Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Denver, Colorado, Gwinnett County, Georgia, Hillsborough County in Florida, our friends right across the river here in New York City, and finally in PGC in Maryland. So those were the 6 districts that the Wallace Foundation conducted its research in terms of the implementation of principal pipelines. So pipelines were implemented in those 6 districts, and Wallace took that research to help inform its process for other school districts. So what did they come up with? They came up with their indicators in 7 domains. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about these domains because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of a principal pipeline. So number 1 is leader standards. We talked about that a minute ago. The fact that new educational standards, new leadership standards have been promulgated and that lots of states are using. And those standards, whether you use those particular standards, the PSEL standards, or another set of standards, the bottom line is building your pipeline, building your leadership structure in your district around standards is a very, very important aspect of a principal pipeline. High quality pre-service principal preparation. So when you're talking about building a pipeline, you're talking about identifying the right people and preparing them for the job of principalship or of leadership, school leadership. Selective hiring and placement. So we want to make sure that we're doing the right job in terms of hiring the right people and then strategically placing them in the schools that they need to be in. Once they get there, there's a level of on-the-job evaluation and support that is needed for those principals, and which flows directly to the next indicator, which is principal supervisors. Now, in here in Newark, principal supervisors are assistant superintendents, right? The assistant superintendents directly supervise the principal. So when we talk about principal supervisors, or if you ever see the term principal supervisors in terms of the conversation for the 7 domains that Wallace puts out, they're talking about assistant superintendents when you're connected to our district here. The development of a leader tracking system, which is really, really important because in a district of this size, as well as the size of those other districts, there are lots of positions, leadership positions, before you get to the principalship, right? And so once you've prepared people and you've selectively hired them and placed them in different areas of leadership in the district, you want to be able to keep track of them to see what they're doing, how they're doing, and what their impact is in different schools. And then, of course, there's the whole concept of systems and sustainability. We want to make sure that you are building the capacity within your district to ensure that the pipeline process can continue, that it can move on as it was planned and as it was structured. So the Wallace Foundation PLC involved 31 states, as well as the island of Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. And when we were invited to participate, I'll go back to make sure I got you right screen there. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. So again, the PLC involved 31 states, island of Puerto Rico, as well as Washington, D.C. And when we were invited to participate in the PLC, we actually went, when I say we, myself and Deputy Superintendent Johnson, went to New York City and sat in on a multi-day PLC with representatives from all of these states and all of these districts. And considering where we are now in the pandemic, it seems odd to think that you were in a room with hundreds of people from all over the country just a little over a year ago when we were being introduced to this concept. And it was a great experience to be there at that time, to meet different folks from all over the country and hear about the different leadership challenges that they have and see the commonalities that we have and how the implementation of a principal pipeline can help us overcome some of those challenges. So within the entire PLC, we have a specific cohort. And our cohort that we are part of includes Jersey City, Patterson, Yonkers, New York, and we also have representation from the island of Puerto Rico. So this is the cohort of districts that we work with specifically. So again, there's a larger PLC that includes the 30 districts across the country, 31 states across the country, but this is our individual cohort, and we all have the same facilitator from the Wallace Foundation that works with us in terms of our work with the implementation of the pipeline. So what did they do for us, right? Wallace gave us our facilitator, and the facilitator worked with a self-study team here in the district. And our self-study team was made up of the individuals that you see on the screen. And this process took place over the course of last school year, beginning in early October, where we would meet and go through the process of looking internally at ourselves and judging ourselves and basing ourselves off of the rubric that the Wallace Foundation developed in terms of its implementation of the 7 domains of the pipeline. So we really took a deep dive at ourselves to see where we stood, where were we in the continuum from beginning to developing to advancing in terms of these aspects of the pipeline. And as you can see, our superintendent was there. And when I say that the superintendent devoted, and it was unbelievable to our facilitator that the superintendent was able to devote the time, but it demonstrated the fact that he understood the importance of the principal pipeline, knowing that his leadership and his presence was significant in terms of how we looked at ourselves and judged ourselves based on those domains. So what did the self-study team do? What was the trajectory of the PLC? So again, I mentioned the PLC that they had in September over in New York City. And the theme then was, just what was your vision? And the great thing about the Wallace Foundation's research about the pipelines is that it's not prescriptive. They don't tell you what to do, right? They give you a set of parameters around which you can work and develop your pipeline within those parameters. They tell you what the best practices are, but they don't tell you have to do A, B, or C. And that was a really, really good thing that came out of that first PLC in September. It also demonstrated the power of the PLC because we were then able to make those connections with people across the country and know that we could rely on them and reach out to them if we had challenges or instances where we would need to, seek help. So after that initial PLC, Wallace had a webinar for each district to prepare for the consultation visits by the facilitator. So that's where we sat down with the self-study team and looked at what is the self-study guide? What are the 7 domains? What are the levels of implementation on the rubric? What does it mean to be developing? What does it mean to be advancing? And so it just set the stage for the work that we were going to do during our consultation visits. And the consultation visits started in October. And they ran through, the initial intent was to stop in January, but because the pandemic, started to come in around this time, some of the consultation visits pushed out a little further than January. One of the most significant aspects that came out of the initial consultation visits, was that each district was to identify an early win. And an early win was something that the self-study team determined was, based on what we're doing already, this is something significant that we can do right now. And this is something that we want to share with other people to let them know that even though this is a lot of work, even though this can be a daunting task, we have established an early win. We do see that there's something that we are doing well. And our early win involved the use and the adoption of those PSLs, those PSL standards that I mentioned previously. So our early win was we're going to take those PSL standards and we're going to align our principal evaluation tool. We're going to align our principal selection interview process with those standards. We're going to use those standards to guide all of the work that we're doing around principals and leadership in our district. That was our early win. And so at the second PLC, which was supposed to take place again in New York City, but as you can see, based on the dates, the pandemic was really just starting to kick in. And so the Wallace Foundation decided that they would not have that PLC in person, but they would do it via Zoom. And we were fortunate enough to lean on our partners from Montclair State to go up there and use some of their facilities to bring our self-study team together and participate in the PLC. And so the theme of that second PLC was insights from the early wins. So each district got together and shared their early wins. And those districts, and some of them were similar to ours in terms of adopting standards, they were able to get together and talk about in smaller groups, again, virtually, what they did in their early win to make things happen. So the next PLC took place in June, and the theme of that one was continuing the work forward during a crisis. So as you know, by June we were full bore into the PLC. I mean, into the pandemic, and it was significant that Wallace reached out to districts and asked them, "Do you want to continue with this work, considering everything that's happened? Right? Is this something that you want to continue to do?" And while there were some districts across the country that opted out of the process, our superintendent, Mr. Leone, wanted us to continue, along with all of the other work that was happening in the district. Because from the day the pandemic struck, from the day we walked out the door of school on March 13th, Superintendent Leone talked about the fact that one day we're going to walk back in the door and we're going to have work to do, work to pick up, schools to improve on that day when we come back. And so, although we have to deal with the crisis, although we have to deal with the pandemic, there is still another level of work that we have to continue to do in order to help ourselves get better. And so Wallace continued to work with those districts that were willing to continue with the work. And so part of that PLC in June was planning for a reentry, right? And what was going to happen over the summer. And those of you who know a little bit about our district know that we did do summer school virtually for the vast majority of our students, but we also had some in-person sessions in a couple of our schools. Another key piece of the work that happened at that PLC was talking about translating hiring, matching, and trading into virtual hiring protocols and processes. So just like all other work had to continue, the work of recruiting and selecting and placing people into schools had to continue, but that had to happen virtually. And so there was some assistance given to us on that. And then of course, we talked about the fact that the draft work plan, the draft 5-year plan was due shortly thereafter on June 12th. Finally, not even finally for last school year, right, between before June 30th, there was another PLC held, and that's where each district was able to share its full 5-year work plan and discuss it and get feedback. And we were fortunate enough to finish our 5-year work plan in advance of this June 26th PLC. And we submitted our work plan to our Wallace facilitator and her colleagues at the organization. And our plan was fully approved without any recommendations for edit. So we were really, really proud of the work that we were able to do going forward with our 5-year work plan. So another PLC occurred in September of this school year. So again, Wallace understood that districts were dealing with the pandemic, dealing with opening and closing and reopening and getting themselves prepared for the work at hand, but they wanted to continue the work for districts who were interested in continuing, and we here in Newark were. So the theme of that September PLC was school reopening and principal pipelines. And of course, the considerations and approaches to the principal pipeline during reopening. And so our consideration here in Newark was, you know what, we're going to continue doing our work to get our pipeline up and running. Another theme that came out of that PLC in September was ensuring that there was equity. Now, we know that there's a whole other workshop we can have on the inequities that were revealed or highlighted or even exacerbated by the pandemic. So the Wallace facilitators wanted to make sure that we discussed and talked about and shared research and best practices on ensuring equity in our schools during the reopening process to whatever extent districts have reopened. And as you know, some districts across the country opened fully, letting all their students back. Some went on a hybrid model, some went virtual. You know, there were all different combinations happening across the country. And so all of those different practices were shared, and people had a chance to get feedback about what their plans were. The next PLC took place just a few weeks ago on November the 10th, and some of our, although the district was closed for, I believe that was Puerto Rican Recognition Day here in Newark. Although our district was closed, we do have some folks in our district who did participate in that PLC. And the theme of that PLC, again, was implementation of the pipelines during our current circumstances. And a sub-theme there is leading through ambiguity. And again, there was a discussion about principal supervisors, again, who are the assistant superintendents for our district. And there was also a discussion at that PLC about leader tracking systems. Again, that is a very, very important aspect of a principal pipeline, that you are tracking leaders to determine best fit as they move forward in the leadership trajectory. So what are some key actions that are going to take place here in the Newark Public Schools as a result of our work with the Wallace Foundation, the implementation of our 5-year principal pipeline plan? So for domain 1, I already talked about the fact that we're going to adopt the PSEL standards as the Newark leadership standards, right? And so we've discussed the fact that we're going to align our principal evaluation tool, our principal selection tool, the processes that we use to determine whether a person is the right fit. We're going to shape all that work around the PSEL standards. Now, that does not mean that we may not modify them down the line, but what it does mean is we're going to start with the PSEL standards as a baseline. Again, when we go back to our early win conversation that I had previously, we found that all of the work that we were doing in our district that was based on principal evaluation, that was based on principal selection and support, was not standards based, right? It was a holdover from a prior administration that did not use standards as the basis for their work. And so we felt, and we agreed with the recommendations from the Wallace Foundation, that basing your work around standards was an important thing to do, because that removes the ambiguity, right? The standards tell you what good leadership is. And I want to encourage any of you who have not taken a look at the PSEL standards in a while to really open those standards up and see what they're talking about, because you'd be surprised at some of the things that they say in terms of supporting students and supporting families and the real work of school leadership. And I think that it's eye-opening when you look at those standards and read them indicator by indicator, standard by standard, and domain by domain.
Matthew,
Yes, sir.
where can you find a copy of those standards?
The PSEL standards are available on the state website, but I can forward those to Dr. Simmons, and when he sends out a copy of this presentation, he can attach those standards to that for your benefit. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So the key action for domain 1, leader standards, we're going to adopt the PSEL standards. For domain 2, high quality pre-service principal preparation. Prepare the next generation of leaders by providing professional development and or access to a graduate program leading to a degree in ed leadership. Now, the reason I say and/or is because there are people in our district who are not in leadership roles, they're in instructional roles, but they have principal certification, right? They can get a leadership job if they seek it or if they have applied for it, but they're not in that role yet. And so domain 2 speaks to preparing people for the role of leadership. And some of that preparation may involve you getting a degree in ed leadership, or it may involve you just getting ready to go into a leadership role. And one of the things that we've been able to do is partner with a local institution to develop a ed leadership program in collaboration with the district, where it's being taught by university faculty as well as district personnel, district leaders, myself included, Deputy Superintendent Johnson included, Executive Director of Human Resource Services, Dr. Yolanda Mendez, are some of the co-teachers in that program to prepare the next generation of leaders for our district. So domain 3, selective hiring and placement. One of the things we're going to look to do this year is establish a far more selective hiring pool and align the job descriptions, performing tasks, and the hiring rubrics to the leadership standards. And I talked about that a little bit already, that there's a strong connection between what's happening in domain 1 and domain 3. Then, of course, there's domain 4, on the job evaluation and support. So we're going to be looking to align the frameworks, and when I say frameworks, again, the evaluation frameworks, to the Newark standards and provide PD to current and aspiring school leaders. So it's not just about the evaluation process, it's also about the support process and the PD process for aspiring school leaders. For domain 5, we're going to be looking to redefine the role of the assistant superintendent to that which has the development of principals as their primary concern. Developing leadership capacity of principals should be what principal supervisors or what assistant superintendents should do. If we're saying, right, if all this research is saying that principals are the lever of change, right, and the assistant superintendents are in place to support principals, then our process, our work has to support principal supervisors in doing their job. So those of us who work in central office, we should be supporting assistant superintendents to do their job, which is building the capacity of principals. Domain 6, the leader tracking system, right? And so whether it's going to be a technology-based system, whether it's going to be a hybrid of technology and a paper-based process, that's something that is still being developed. But we're going to inform the process of preparation, hiring, evaluation, and support. So the leader tracking system should take into account who people are, what PD they've received, what their evaluations say, what is the profile of people, so that when we're looking to place them in different schools, that we have an idea of who they are, what they've done, what PD they've received, what support they've received, so that when we place them in the most advantageous situation for themselves as leaders and also for the school. And finally, for domain 7, systems and sustainability. We want to build stakeholder support, which I'm hoping I'm doing today, right? Sharing what we're doing in Newark for our leadership pipeline. We're building stakeholder support for the implementation of the pipeline and begin looking at what's happening in the district in terms of our procedures, our lines of authority, and our support to support the articulation of everything that's in our pipeline plan. So those are the key actions we're looking to take to happen this school year. Obviously, again, we're still in the midst of the pandemic, so some of these things are moving a little slower than others, but the commitment to do this work continues in our district. The superintendent has empowered Deputy Superintendent Johnson and her team to continue working on our principal pipeline, and we intend to do that. And so that brings to an end the formal aspect of my presentation. And so I do want to now open up the floor for any questions that may have come up during the course of the presentation.
So I want to open it up for people to either, put your chat down or just go ahead and unmute at this point and ask your question. But Matthew, I do have a question. In thinking about the 7 domains, which one do you feel is most important? How will you prioritize the importance of the 7 domains?
So let me go back to the full list of, well, let me go back to the full list of domains. So I think it's a really good question. And I think lots of people, when we talk about the 7 domains, they always focus on the preparation, right? We always talk about we want to get people ready to do the job of the principal, right? And that it's all about people, and it's all about developing the right people for the role of leadership, whether it be principal, vice principal, director, supervisor, department chair, whatever the leadership role is people are going into. That when you're talking about a principal pipeline, that's all you're talking about. You're just talking about getting people ready. And while that there is some truth to that, as you can see, when you're talking about a principal pipeline in terms of what the work that the Wallace Foundation is supporting, we're talking about all these other things that have to happen to make that be real, right? If you're going to focus on preparation, then you have to make sure that that preparation is based on standards. You have to make sure that after they're prepared, that they're hired and placed properly, that you want to provide them with the proper on-the-job evaluation and support, that you want to make sure that the people that are doing that evaluation and support are developed and are focused on that job, that they don't have all these other extraneous responsibilities that take away from their ability to supervise principals and build their leadership capacity. That we have a leader tracking system so that we know that we can forecast where vacancies are going to be, and so we can make proper fit with people, and that we have a system that is sustainable and is self-serving in terms of itself, and that it can continue moving forward. So I would say that although one standard is important in terms of who the people are, right, and preparing them, they're all important in terms of their interconnectivity and their interreliance on one another.
No, thank you for that. That's good. Any additional questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Brewster, for your presentation. My name is Robin Ince. I'm the new executive director at the Newark City of Learning Collaborative. My question goes to domains 4 and 7. I wonder, principals are often leading school buildings that are made up of, communities that want to feel engaged. So as far as support is concerned, are there opportunities for their staff to be engaged in the buy-in so that there's sort of a circle of support for the perhaps new school leader? And then are there opportunities for the community to be involved in notions of support? And then for domain 7 with sustainability, does that go to retention plans? And I may have missed it, I joined late.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Those are really, really good questions. And I think your question about domain 4 in terms of support, when we talk about on-the-job evaluation and support, we are definitely talking about the entire school community, right? And had we not been in this pandemic where we are all virtual, we would have been having sessions at schools and around schools to let people be involved in the process of, now, when we have a vacancy, there's always a committee that is involved in helping the assistant superintendent and the superintendent make their recommendations or vet the candidates that come down the pike, right? And so this would be an extension of that work. This would be more formalized in a way that the community could be involved, whether it be via committee, whether it be a panel or a forum where candidates could speak, just kind of like we do for board candidates or things of that nature. So I think that, again, we're in the process of developing all of that work, but the involvement of the community is critically important when we talk about on-the-job evaluation and support of aspiring leaders and leaders once they get in place. Now, let's jump over to when we're talking about systems and sustainability, we are talking about retention. I mean, retention really comes in, is really connected to number 4, right? I mean, if we're gonna get people to stay, we have to support them, right? We have to make sure that they are given the tools that they need to do their jobs well. But when we do talk about systems and sustainability, some of the aspects of that rubric do speak to what are the policies and practices and protocols that are happening in the district that would lead someone to want to stay, right? What are we doing to establish the conditions whereby this principal feels so supported from their assistant superintendent, from the superintendent, from their school community, from organizations like NCLC, right? From everyone in the community to know that we are behind you because we know that you've been selected based on a standards process, that you've been selectively placed here, that you're getting the support from your ASUP. We have all these things in place to support you. You're going to stay. We're going to make you want to stay because we're all behind you 100%. The bottom line philosophy around all of this is that the principal is the key lever of change for our schools. And if everyone is behind that principal and doing what we can do to support that principal, then that school will improve, and the research bears that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions?
Yes, Rodney Jones here. I typed one out. I'm sending it to you right now. Maybe if you can't understand it, I can certainly try to articulate what's there. And there is one misspelling, so you have to forgive me.
We all have that every now and then.
And Rodney, you can feel free just to go ahead and ask the question.
In standard number 4,
Yeah.
According to the PSEL that you sent, I got down to standard number 4, which is around curriculum and assessment. And one of the things that's probably critical is that you have overachievers and underachievers. So how often do we really create a curriculum and an assessment around those children? Are we really creating a separate curriculum for each child, which is really what our job is supposed to be about? However, and I'm not a teacher. I'm actually a financier of schools and alternative schools. How can we integrate other players who are out there providing curriculum for each child so that no child is left out? How can that dialogue be created and followed?
So there's two things. Number one, I want to make sure that we're not confusing the 7 domains with the PSEL standards, right? So the PSEL standards are what we're going to look at here in terms of adopting for our leader standards. And that's the document that I'm going to share with you when I send this presentation over to Dr. Simmons. There are 10 standards there. And those 10 standards are going to be the standards, again, that our work is framed around. Now, I think what you're speaking to is standard 4 that speaks about curriculum. Is that correct, Rodney?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a separate question than what's here about on the job evaluation and support. What you're talking about is what are we doing at the school level to differentiate instruction, to differentiate the curriculum, to modify the curriculum for students along different levels of their achievement continuum, if I'm hearing you correctly.
That's correct.
And that's a critical job. That's a critical job of a school leader, right? That's a critical responsibility of a school leader to make sure that he or she has recruited, hired, and prepared teachers who understand that teaching is not about opening up the book on the first day of class and starting on page 1 and trying to progress throughout the course of the year, right? The textbook is just a tool for the curriculum. It's not the curriculum. So it's the teacher's job to modify the curriculum and take students from where they are to where they need to be. And it's an effective leader that knows how to do that. And what we're talking about in terms of the pipeline is identifying those effective leaders, people who already know how to do that, and building up their capacity in other areas so that when we put them in a school as a vice principal, we put them in a school as a principal, we put them in one of our high schools as a department chair for English or math or science or social studies, that they can support teachers in their work of modifying the curriculum and adopting the curriculum to meet each individual student's needs.
Thank you, Matthew. Well said. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hope that answered your question.
Matthew, in your presentation, I was thinking about your biography and just how some of your work is looking to produce anti-racist school leaders and teachers. How does this work play a role in that, or is this kind of disconnected from that?
No, I don't think it's disconnected at all. When we talk about on-the-job evaluation and support, when we talk about support, one of the things that we're talking about, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm touching the buttons in the wrong place here. I want to get back. When we talk about support, we're talking about professional development. And professional development includes what we're doing for equity and what we're doing for social justice, what we're doing for anti-racism. One of the things that we're going to do this winter, as a matter of fact, in February, we are sponsoring out of the Office of Academic Services a Winter Leadership Institute that is going to focus a lot on those areas that you discussed. And so we've done, a lot of work already this year in terms of our professional development for school leaders. When we first come back to work, we're school leaders, those of us as central officers here, 12 months a year. But when school leaders come back, vice principals, department chairs, and such, when they first come back to work in August, we put them through multi-day professional development, a lot of which this school year was focused on equity and racial justice and social justice. We're just being responsive to what's happening across the country. And so we're going to continue that work at our Winter Institute at the end of February, where we're going to have speakers and sessions that address the development of anti-racist mindsets and combating inequity and fighting for social justice. Because if that doesn't happen at the school level, if teachers aren't involved in that work, if principals aren't involved in that work, then I think the goals that we have and our vision for those kinds of things aren't going to take hold nationally the way we would like them to if the schools aren't deeply involved in that process.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that. Any additional questions?
Hi. Yes. Thanks for this presentation, Matthew. Very insightful. I'm a quantitative researcher at the Cornell Center. And part of what I always wonder about is how assessment or monitoring progress works out. I think of the standard measures of administrator or principals, their years of education, years in the district, things like that. And it occurred to me that the work that you're doing will largely not be measured in any of those standard metrics. So can you reflect a bit on how you would like this work to be assessed? What would be some measures of progress, both in terms of process and the outcome?
So I'm not sure that's exactly right? Because when we talk about a leader tracking system, the entity in our district that is responsible for developing our leader tracking system is our data team, which is full of data researchers who do probably similar work to what you do. And so while the leader tracking system has not yet been built, it is intended to take on some of the quantitative data that is out there and crunch it and organize it and structure it in a way that helps advise our process in domain 3, which is selective placement and hiring. So it's the intent of the leader tracking system to collect data that is going to be used in whatever way possible to help us make these critical decisions. So what that data is going to be, how it's going to be incorporated, how it's going to be collected, I think a lot of that is still yet to be determined. And again, we do have a full data team here in the district that is going to be charged with doing some of that work. And some of my colleagues are actually in the process of getting the data team back together again, to continue their thoughts about how we're going to develop our leader tracking system. That was one of the domains that we realized that we were definitely in our not started yet category in terms of our development on the rubric. Like, we just didn't have a process necessarily of how we were going to track leaders in our district and to make critical decisions about where they should be placed. And so our work for this year is just looking at what should a leader tracking system be? Who has a leader tracking system? What platforms and applications are out there that can be useful for that process? And so if you are interested in making recommendations, or you are curious about the work that we're doing in that regard, you can reach out to me directly, and I can connect you with the lead for our data team to help, answer some of those questions or receive some of the feedback that you have about that work.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
If I can interject something here, I just want to say that one, yes, Cornwall would be very interested in being a part of those conversations. And two, that of the things that I have seen around the new, because I think Van Deen was talking largely about the old metrics, the metrics of another research generation. Among the new metrics, I think one of the things that I'm most intrigued, metrics for measuring the quality of principal, I'm trying to say. One of the most intriguing is the principal's capacity to build trust in the building.
Wow.
Not a kind of question that was in anybody's head 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It is very, very clearly one of the strongest and most consistent predictors of which schools are going to get better.
And, I talked a little bit about how we have a pre-service preparation program for people who do not yet have their certification. And the program that we're working with uses a book. I think I have a copy of it around here somewhere, but there's a book that speaks to trust being a key aspect of leadership, Dr. Payne. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And Dr. Simmons, what I'll do is I'll share that book with you, that title with you as well. I don't have it, it's on another shelf somewhere, but I'll share that title with you. It is a leadership instrument, a leadership text that again speaks to the importance of trust being a key component of leadership. And that's something that we want to make sure we focus on with our next generation of leaders coming up. And so how we're going to measure that for people who are already on the job, that's a great question. That's something that we can probably talk to our data team about. How do we gauge, how do we measure principals and leaders' capacity to engender trust? Make a note of that.
Hi, if I can just chime in here. My name is Katie Bulkley. I'm the chair of Ed Leadership at Montclair State and partnering with Matt on this work. And it was really wonderful to hear, Matt, again, how all these pieces fit together. And I completely agree that the emphasis on pre-service preparation can really take on too much and that it can only be one piece of the puzzle. And I would just say, to the point of trust, which is an issue, Charles, I completely agree with, and is woven throughout our pre-service program, is, if the district hasn't already taken a look at the 5 essentials, which I'm sure Charles is extremely familiar with, that instrument might be a really valuable. Charles, I don't know if you would agree that would be a valuable place to look in that way.
Yes, and in fact, that was actually part of the body of research that I was thinking about. And one of the book that Matthew may be thinking of might be Tony Brake's Brake and Schneider Trust in Schools. And in that book, you will find listing of the particular items they use to measure leadership in general, but specifically to measure the issue of trust building leadership.
That's not the book that I was talking about, but I was hoping that Dr. Bulkley could remind me. I don't have my book. I don't have my book in front of me. The book that we used for the class that we taught this past fall.
You mean the core book that we use, the Kuzen-Posner?
Yes, thank you.
So we use a book called The Leadership Challenge by Kouzes, Kouzes, and Posner. It's actually a business school book, but I think it's one of the, not business school, but it's not specific to education, but really aligns really very well with the PESAL standards, I think, in a lot of ways, and does focus heavily on the importance of credibility and trust in leadership. And yes, that's just, I think, one piece of the ways in which the program tries to weave issues of trust throughout a number of different courses.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it.
I don't know if there were any additional questions for Matthew. So Matthew, when you share your PowerPoint with me, any additional, materials you would like for me to share with those who registered for the event, I definitely will. Charles, I coming to the end, I didn't know if you had any parting words.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say a few things other than thanks. One is that this presentation has helped me realize that while a lot of folk who are interested in the whole problem of how we improve instruction in urban systems are really focused in on deprivatizing instruction as one of the absolutely key levers. A lot of what Matthew is talking about is deprivatizing leadership. It's as if the assumption is this job is just too difficult for us to put one person in a building and expect him or her to be able to do everything by him or herself, right? That systems have to think collectively about creating systems of principal selection and ongoing support. So deprivatizing it too. Second, there is a growing community of researchers and practitioners. I think I'm pretty much, you can count me among them, who think that in urban systems, the single most important reform is the leadership reform. You can do all the rest of it you want, right? You can bring in all the programs you want, all the instructional change you want, all the curriculum you want. If there's not leadership at the building level, it doesn't get traction, or if it gets traction, it doesn't sustain it. You get these high rising programs that fall apart in the absence of leadership. And if you look at some of the strongest cities, Chicago, one of the fastest improving city, Charlotte, one of the longest running stories of high improvement for low-income children. Tennessee, arguably the fastest improving state in the country. Tennessee or Louisiana. All of those are considered to be largely stories about dramatic improvements in the quality of leadership at the building level, right? And so I'm just saying all of that in part to underscore that Newark is really on the cutting edge of the national conversation in the work that it's doing with the Wallace Foundation. And it's just very, very exciting. On the other hand, and maybe I'm not in the right conversations, I think it's a worry and something that we will look at collectively more later on down the line, I hope. I'm not sure the statewide conversation in New Jersey cities, with the exception of places like Jersey City and Newark, has caught up with the national conversation, right? I'm just not sure the state is where it needs to be in understanding and reacting to the importance of the principalship. So anyway, we can come back to that. But primarily, I just want to say thanks for a really important presentation, Matthew.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you, and I appreciate Dr. Simmons and for the opportunity to share the work that we're doing in the district to develop our principal pipeline.
Hi, if I may. Hi, everyone. So I turned my camera and I muted to give Matt his platform. I just want to say that great job, Matthew, in sharing what we're doing in the district as it relates to the principal pipeline project. This work has been extremely rewarding, eye-opening, and intentional. I missed part of the presentation, so I'm not sure if Matt went into just some of the highlights from what we've done thus far and what we've been able to accomplish just since our principal pipeline plan was accepted. But just in Q1, just all of the work that we've been able to accomplish. One, as it relates to providing principal coaches to our novice principals, that's going extremely well. Someone mentioned on here just around support for not just the principal, but the community at large and the schools. And so a lot of our principal coaches and some of our partners, the work that they're doing in professional learning communities, in SLT meetings, which are our school leadership team meetings, where all of the principals meet with the assistant superintendents, their presence in those meetings and in those trainings not only help support the principal, but the teachers, the teacher leaders, the coaches, even the assistant superintendents. And so, you know, it's been a really, really a great project. We're super excited that the Wallace Foundation has, you know, chosen Newark to be a part of this. And, you know, more to come as it relates to where we are with the Principal Pipeline Project. 2 years ago, we had 15 vacancies. Am I right? Or no, I'm saying that wrong. Let me not say that right. We had 21 at one time new principals. I think that was last year. Am I right, Matthew?
Year before last, we had 20.
Year before last, 21 non-tenured principals, 21 out of 60 non-tenured principals, less than 3 years. And so we recognized that we needed to do something different. We needed to support, we needed to retain. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And now we have the new schools opening. We have 3 new schools opening in September. And we're in the process of recruiting for those schools now, school leaders for those schools now. But, you know, it was a challenge for us. It was a challenge to have so many new school leaders in buildings. And we knew that we needed to do something different. So I want to thank you, Matt, for the presentation. I want to thank Cornwall Center, Dr. Payne, Mr. Simmons, everyone for inviting Newark Board of Education staff members to even participate in these discussions. I know that Dr. Riley also had a presentation that she did with the group. And so I want to thank you. And if you need my support in any way, anyone else you'd like to hear from, please just let me know. We're always happy to partner with you guys.
I promise you I'll be reaching out to you.
I'm sure.
But Matthew, thank you so much. Matthew, you were such a pleasure to work with in coordinating this. And like I said, the information has been so useful in helping us think about how we could, you know, continue to partner with NPS and how we can bring the community into this conversation. And I think that's been one of the things I've really been excited about this exchange with, you know, a diverse group of stakeholders and their opportunity to participate and hear directly from the district. I think has been so important. And these conversations related to education will continue tomorrow. I put in the chat, but we actually we'll have Dr. Bo presentation, and she's, you know, basically a continuation of this. Her presentation tomorrow will be looking at community engaged work and looking at an example of 2 urban school districts and their partnerships with communities. So we, you know, welcome everyone to come back and continue to participate in these very important conversations as we think about how various stakeholders can continue to think about and partner with school districts as they do such important work in terms of educating young people and ultimately tomorrow's leaders. So with that, if there's nothing else, Charles, I didn't know if you had any closing or any additional.
I'm good. Thanks, Phil.
Yep. So I want to thank everyone for participating. Be on the lookout for information that I'll be sending to you related to Matthew's presentation and some of the materials that he referenced today. So I ask everyone to, you know, continue to be safe, and thank you again for your participation in our session today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Nicole.